Have you ever found yourself lying in bed, opening Instagram, eventually doom scrolling, and then realizing you have no friends or social life whatsoever, proceed to even more doom scrolling until you've reached a breaking point and realize that you've done nothing with your life and everyone is ahead of you? So you start questioning all your life choices up until this point, and then realize somehow it's 6 p.m. Don't know what all the time went, and you gotta make dinner to feed yourself. So you get yourself out of bed and make mac and cheese and eat it while rewatching Friends for the 6th time. No, just me. Oh, this is gonna be very awkward. Okay, forget it. Forget everything I just said. Or actually, don't forget everything I just said. Do you know why I just told you what I did? Do you know why I told you this story about doom scrolling and sitting in bed? And based on the video title, you would assume that this is weird. You would assume, why is this story even here? But there is actually some symbolism to the story, and I will get to it. So basically, this video is me yapping about why we as a society don't talk about mental health enough, and why we view it as a weakness, and why we treat mental health as something that is only for people in crisis instead of just for people. So before we answer these very heavy-hitting questions, hi, I'm Asta. I just forgot to introduce myself there. Wow. So let's talk about myself first, since this is the first impression that I'm ever going to give to the internet, so this is fun. I'm a second-year undergraduate psychology student at the University of Melbourne, and what else? I like Bollywood. Well, who doesn't? I mean, I like rom-coms, even though I've never been in love, but I can still like them. This is going very weirdly, but I'm not really sure how this is relevant to all of this, but yeah, I guess that's me. So based on everything that you know about me, how am I qualified to talk about mental health, considering that I'm a 19-year-old teenager? Well, in the technical sense, I'm not, but that isn't what I started this channel for. I actually started it to sort of destigmatize mental health for myself. And why am I doing that? Well, here's a little backstory. I'm brown, I'm Indian, so I grew up in a very Indian household where mental health wasn't really something that was discussed. My parents never discussed it, my grandparents never discussed it, and I'm gonna get into that later in the video. But basically, I wanted to go on this journey where I wanted to destigmatize the concept of mental health for myself. And I wanted to share that journey with the world, as if it wasn't already hard. I'm gonna make it harder for myself, because that's what overachievers do. But yeah, so I just wanted to take you guys along on that journey. And I feel like I have said destigmatized way too many times. It's a weird word now. But anywho, back to the actual point of this video. So I want to ask a question, which I will answer probably in the next 2 minutes. But why is it when somebody like breaks an arm or gets into some sort of physical accident, like people like rush in to help, and they're like, you basically feel like the world is beside you, right? But when someone is struggling mentally, let's say with like anxiety, burnout, depression, whatsoever, we get told things like, oh, everybody has problems, be a man. I'm not a man, but still, deal with it. You're being dramatic, you're just lazy. And why do the words, I need a therapist, or I go to therapy, why do they sound like a confession more than than a cry for help? And why? Seriously, why do we still treat mental health like it's only for crazy people? Or as Indians call it, crazies. Why do we still treat mental health like it's only for broken people, even though it's just for all people? I believe it should be for all people. Okay, let's break it down, shall we? So let's start with where a lot of our ideas about mental health actually come from. Our culture. And when I say culture, I don't mean, pop culture. I don't mean all of that. I also don't mean religion, because that's too complicated, and I don't want to already overcomplicate things because, religion is too complicated as a concept itself. But when I say culture, I mean the way that we were raised to think about emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones. So if you haven't noticed yet, or you're watching this as a second screen while scrolling Instagram, which I'm definitely not offended by, I'm brown. I grew up in a very Indian household, and in many Indian and Asian households, mental health isn't really something that you talk about. It's not really like it's not a dinner table conversation. You don't just go around telling people that, hey, I have anxiety and stuff like that. No, you don't do that. So let me take you through the life cycle of an Asian person from birth to death, right? So in birth, you're born, right? So you're born and you study, right? And then you eventually start working, and then you help out your parents because they're old and they'll guilt trip you to do it. And then you stay grateful for everything, and then you die. Basically the whole 9 yards. That's basically the cycle of an Asian person. And if you're not okay mentally, like if you're struggling mentally, you definitely don't go around telling people about it, because that's just seen as a problem. For you, for your family, and for your reputation. Which sounds very dramatic, but actually is true. So there's sort of a message that you get early on. It's like, oh, crying is a weakness. Therapy is for crazy people. If you're burnt out, you're just lazy. If you have anxiety, be grateful. All of that stuff. Most of this isn't said out loud, actually. It's not just directly told to you. You mostly learn it through the reactions of other people, through their silence, the avoidance, the fact that every time something gets too real, the subject gets changed, which I've experienced way too many times in my life. And you end up internalizing the idea that a lot of these feelings are inappropriate, that you shouldn't be feeling them in the first place. And being upset makes you a difficult person, or struggling mentally makes you a dramatic person. But where does all this come from in the first place? A lot of it goes back to collectivism, actually, which is still how many Asian communities are operated on, despite us living in a very individualistic world. I don't know how to say that word. So in collectivist cultures, your identity isn't it's not just about you. Your identity is tied to your family, to your community, to your reputation, to everything. Your identity is not about you. Your identity is about other people. And that means that mental health, or struggling mentally, is not seen as a personal or a private issue. It's seen as something that reflects on your family and your community, which is the scariest thing I've ever heard of in my life. So if you're going through something mentally, the last thing you want to do is talk about it to anyone. Because the main concern won't be, are you okay? It'll be, what will people say? Which sounds very dystopian, but it's actually true. And this creates sort of a double bind emotionally. You're expected to be okay all the time. You're expected to portray this image of being okay all the time. But if you're actually struggling, mentally, the last thing you're expected to do is talk about it. And that silence, it gets passed down through the generations. The thing is, our parents and our grandparents never really grew up with the tools and the platforms that we have currently to talk about all this stuff. And mental health wasn't really discussed back then because it was not really understood as a concept. Or in my opinion, based on what I've heard from actual older people, is that it was more misunderstood than not understood. It was misunderstood as a sign of weakness, a sign of failure, or a sign of madness, which yeah. And now we're the generation in between, sort of. And the thing is, most of us grew up with the internet. I was born in 2006. So for most of my life, I have had access to the internet, and we as a generation have much more access to a lot more information. I mean, for God's sakes, we have Mental Health Awareness Month. We have fundraisers for anxiety. We have galas for depression and whatnot. We know more, right? But knowing doesn't always translate to feeling safe enough to speak out. Because we're still carrying that fear. We're still carrying that fear of being judged, of being misunderstood, or seen as dramatic or lazy, right? And that fear eventually turns into shame, and that shame turns into silence. And the stigma that started outside of us eventually becomes something that we carry inside of us for the rest of our lives. And that is internalized stigma. And it's really powerful. It's what makes you hesitate before even being able to reach out. It's what makes you second guess whether what you're feeling is bad enough to even count. And it's what keeps a lot of people from even getting the support that they need. The thing is, stigma isn't just about what society thinks externally. Well, that is the main definition of stigma, but it's also about what we as individuals have absorbed from that society. And unless we talk about where it comes from, the culture, the silence, the fear, the avoidance, we can't really unlearn it. Or I think we can, or in my opinion, we can, but it's a process. And it's a process that I'm currently going through, and it's the reason that I am making this video right now. And here's the thing. When nobody teaches you how to process your emotions or how to do anything with them, you don't just magically figure it out once you're an adult. No. You end up doing what most people do, and what I myself do, which is called suppressing. And while that might sound harmless on the surface, just don't cry in public, we can feel this later, I have to go to work, I have to go to uni or whatever, it actually messes with your body and your brain more than you think. So if our brains are screaming and our bodies are crumbling, why do we still pretend that we're fine? Because most of us don't know any other way. No one taught us what to do with our emotions, so we suppress them, right? Now when I say suppression, I don't mean the dramatic kind, I mean the normal kind. The I'll cry later, I don't have time to feel this kind of suppression. You feel something heavy inside, but instead of dealing with it, you scroll, you clean your room, which I've done multiple times. It sounds weird, but it can happen. Or you end up watching Gilmore Girls for the 7th time. Personally, I'm more of a how to lose a guy in 10 days type of gal, so it's super common, but it's also kind of terrible for you. So let's get into the science of it. Here's what actually happens when you suppress emotions. When something stressful happens, even something minor like getting ignored by a friend, for example, the part of your brain called the amygdala lights up. And that's the part of the brain that processes emotions such as fear and threat. And it sends signals to your body that something is wrong. Now, normally, your prefrontal cortex would step in. That's the part of the brain that helps you think rationally and calm down. But in the case of suppression, that part gets entirely skipped. Instead of processing, your brain just shoves the feeling down like an unopened email. And like all unopened emails, it builds up until eventually you have 9,999 unopened emails that you refuse to read from stuff that you subscribe to randomly that you don't want, but don't know how to unsubscribe. Your body, meanwhile, goes into fight or flight mode. Your heart rate goes up, your muscles tense up, your breathing gets shallow, and even if externally you look fine, your nervous system is treating everyday stress like a threat, which is exhausting. And this isn't just a one-off reaction. If you're suppressing your emotions constantly, which let's be honest, most of us are, your body starts releasing more cortisol, aka the stress hormone. And cortisol in short bursts is fine, but in the long term, it messes everything up. Your digestion, your sleep, your immune system, your focus, your mood, everything takes a hit. So now you're not just emotionally drained, but physically tired as well. And because you're not showing it, people might think that you're unmotivated or lazy, but in actuality, your nervous system is on fire. And if we go to the extreme side of things, there's also something known as emotional blunting. When you're so used to pushing your feelings down that you dial everything down, or your brain dials everything down for you. So you're not overwhelmed, but you're also not excited, but you're also not joyful, but you're also not present. It's sort of like putting your emotions on airplane mode. It's like you're technically still functioning, but nothing's going through. And this is actually where that famous book title comes in, The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Even if you haven't read it, which I totally get, the book is very traumatizing, I haven't finished it in 3 years. The main idea is simple. If you don't process your emotions mentally, they will show up physically. If you ever learned physics in high school, you should know this. There's this thing about energy, there's this concept about energy, where energy can never be destroyed, it can only be transformed. And it's sort of the same thing about emotions. If you're pushing them down, you would think that they would get destroyed, but they don't. They just show up physically. They manifest into physical symptoms. And that doesn't mean like, oh, your sadness is a disease. No, that can't even physically happen. It means, and like I mentioned before, the chronic stress and suppression will wear down your system over time. And in a really bad way. So when people say things like move on or get over it, they're ignoring how our biology actually works. Like the thing is, you can't just move on from something that you're actively responding to. You can ignore it for sure, but it doesn't disappear like we might think. It just sits there. And eventually, it all has to spill out. As breakdowns, as burnout, that weird moment where you start crying because nobody responded to you in the group chat for about 8 hours. Suppression might seem like strength externally, but it's just survival mode. And staying in survival mode 24/7 is not sustainable. We're not the Flintstones, for God's sakes. It's 2025. Get a grip. So what actually happens when we grow up believing that mental health is a weakness and suppress all of our emotions constantly? When we learn that talking about our emotions is equivalent to oversharing and trauma dumping? Well, for starters, we wait. We end up thinking that it's just a rough patch, it's not that bad. But that rough patch can extend to months or even years. And research actually shows that people with anxiety disorders can wait an average of 3 to 30 years before seeking help and treatment. 30 years! I'm sorry, that just became very dramatic. But 3 to 30 years, that's a lot of time. Not because they're fine, but because they don't think they're unwell enough to seek help. Secondly, we make silence the norm. If no one talks about it, no one feels like they can. And if you grow up thinking that struggling is shameful, you're not going to talk about your therapy sessions the same way that you talk about your new diet. It's just not possible. And the thing is, that silence doesn't just isolate us, it teaches the next person that they have to be silent as well, which is what I'm most afraid of for the next generation of kids, as they will also grow up with the same internalized stigma that we had and our parents had and our grandparents had, and they will eventually be going through all the same struggles that we did, which is just not advancing as a society, which is what we don't want. So that stigma ends up getting passed down through the generations. Thirdly, we start believing that suffering is just normal. We sort of make a deal with the devil for being constantly tired, emotionally numb, and vaguely detached from everything that you used to enjoy just for, adulthood. And if there's any religious people in the audience, take it as a joke. This is a joke. I'm a very religious person. Okay? I'm a Hindu. I'm very religious. Take it as a joke, please. I don't want to be cancelled. But the truth is, we as a society have sort of normalized, anxiety, burnout, breakdowns as personality traits rather than actual symptoms of a mental illness or like mental health problems. And finally, the worst of them, we eventually stop reaching out. We pull back from people. Not out of disinterest, but because it feels easier than explaining to them how we actually feel. And that distance, that eventually creates loneliness, which just makes everything worse. And it's this entire cycle of, meh. So the very belief that our mental health struggles make us weak is in actuality making us even sicker and lonelier. So it might start off with stigma, but it just doesn't end there. It turns into disconnection, delay, and the kind of slow suffering that we don't talk about enough, which is exactly why we need to. Okay, that became a bit too serious for a second, but moving on. Where do we go from here as a society? Well, ideally not back to pretending everything is fine when it's clearly not. Not back to brushing things off as, nah, I'm good, which I'm definitely guilty of, when we're clearly not. And definitely not back to treating therapy as something for crazies. But here's the thing. Mental health is unfortunately not a light switch. It's not just you're fine or you need help. It's an entire spectrum. And for most of us, at any given time, we're probably somewhere in the middle of that. And that's exactly where support should exist. Not just for the extreme moments, not when we completely break down, but for the ones that slowly build up over time. Like the thing is, you don't need a diagnosis to receive support. That should not be the bare minimum of society, is to have a diagnosis and then you're allowed to receive support. That's just a stupid concept. But getting that diagnosis is very hard. And I'm gonna, touch on that in a future video. Like hitting rock bottom should not be the social validation that we need to finally ask for help. And asking for help in any way that you feel comfortable in, going to therapy, talking to a friend, or just even acknowledging that you as a human have emotions does not make us weak. It makes us human. We are not robots. This is not 2047. This is not Blade Runner 2049. We are not robots. What we actually need though as a society is to stop seeing emotional pain as a defect. Because pain is not a defect. It's a signal that something is wrong. And responding to that signal, that's just smart. That doesn't make you weak. That's just a smart thing to do. It means that you know you're not well and you want to get better. That's a good thing. Stop treating it like it's bad. So if anyone needs to hear this today, you are not broken. You are not broken for struggling. You are not dramatic. You are not lazy. You are not weak. All people need care at all stages, not just after we've completely fallen apart or not just after we've completely broken down. And maybe, just maybe, if we started treating mental health like health instead of a moral issue or a political issue, fewer people would have to hit rock bottom before they felt allowed to speak up. Anyways, that's all from me today. I think I've emotionally unpacked more in the last 30 minutes than I have in 3 years of therapy, which is something. But thanks for watching, and if you've made it this far without clocking out to scroll Instagram, I appreciate you for being here. More videos will be coming soon because apparently I have way too much to say. Until then, take care of your mind like you take care of your phone. Don't wait until it's at 1% to plug it in. See you in the next one. Bye!